Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. We just had a great Mother's Day time with cake and cookies and have everybody stoked up on sugar. We're going to try to finish this message before the crash. The title is a continuation of really our looking at and understanding the role of expectation in our lives, and the idea that we will really need an expectation of God to function properly. The last few weeks we've been looking at the idea of these encounters. Most of us have had some kind of encounter with God, no matter how we would kind of describe it or what language we would use. Maybe it was some special event for some of our younger people, maybe summer camp. But there were places or a time when you certainly felt an experience with God. And I know that for myself, being in a room with 1,000 people all singing, we praise God in our soul, it can change the environment of the room, and it can provoke an experience with God. That's a good thing. I think it's what God intended in those moments. And where we've been working from in that is the idea that these encounters we have with God in a conference or in a home group or a setting of worship, or maybe when you're out in nature and you experience some moment with God, that these moments, these mountaintop experiences, that we often, whether we do it intentionally, unintentionally, we want to recreate those. We want to reenact those. So we want to go back to that conference or hear that band again. And in doing so, we're really pursuing the mountaintop experience. We're pursuing the engagement with God. We're doing what we know to do, but what we've done is we have connected an experience with God with a setting. We've connected an experience with God with a people group or a people or a church. And I'm kind of wanting to give, I think that is really sets us up to remain immature and weak. Because it's an immaturity and a weakness that requires these other sources for us to go to the mountaintop with God. It limits our ability to operate wherever we are as the people of God. And so when we come back from a conference, we're stoked, we're encouraged. Everything, even when I was a youth pastor, after the conference, everything came easier for my youth. I mean, they could make better decisions easier. They could read their Bible easier. Everything became easier just with that experience. But without that experience, everything becomes more and more difficult. What God is really wanting is for us to be transformed into that experience here, that we carry that experience with us. We talked last week about the idea that these encounters with God, they don't always turn out good in the way of the response is good. That some people, there is a fear response to an encounter with God. It's messy, it's strange. I was one time we had this get together and this girl just started laughing. She was just laughing, and she was just laughing. She's up for ministry. She was just laughing, and people were just kind of creeped out a little bit. Why is she laughing? Who's she laughing at? Because they didn't really understand what was going on. There can be a fear response, especially to what can look untidy. It can present opportunity. An encounter with God presents opportunity. An encounter with God almost always has some margin of skepticism. Was it real? Was that person really healed? Did that really happen? Were those people really encountering God, or was that just them being emotional? And that could happen for us. Even something we thought was very real 6 months ago, today we look back and it doesn't seem to be as real. And skepticism plays a role in our immaturity. All these things play a role in our immaturity. Now, where I'm going with this is, if we are a God people and God is raising us up to have the mountaintop quality rooted inside us, that it is available to transform, to encourage, to heal, to show mercy and kindness, that in all circumstances we become a people connected with God in a way that we are never a victim, in a way that we are never lost, in a way that we are never hopeless. That something in the people of God has a mountaintop quality at all times. Even in the most distressing moments, it is available to them wherever they are. And then the final thing is, those mountaintop encounters can bring change in our soul. Change in our expectation. And that's the power. That's the power of the experience with God, is, are we allowing it to up our expectation? Instead of putting our expectation in a box, when those songs play, when that band plays, when I'm around these friends because they're really good with God, when I'm this or that, I'm in a better spot. My experience with God is better. My expectation is higher. And when they're not around, my expectation drops. You see, that is the immaturity that's happening there. But change and the pursuit of that change means that God is always God, all the time, everywhere, in every moment of my life, no matter what the circumstances are. And because of that, my expectation is never wrong to be high. I want you to hear that. It is never wrong for my expectation in God to be high. Not in the service, not in the pastor, not in the home group, not in the band, but in God himself, in the Spirit himself, that my expectation is never wrong to be high. And it is never wrong for me to participate in that expectation, meaning to step into it. Now, other people would call that faith, to step into your expectation. I think it's a good word for it. But at the end of the day, expectation is a good and healthy thing when it's placed in God. And the fact that always expectation and opportunity go together. And it becomes the challenge. Will I be disillusioned in my disappointment? Or will I step into the expectation that God is still in control, God is still at work, that things are still right with my God? I'm going to step in that. I will not be disillusioned. Why? Because it's not a part of my expectation in God. At what point should I be disillusioned serving God himself? At what point does that make sense? God has me disillusioned today. I feel like God is inspiring me to be disillusioned. About doubting Jesus' presence or his intentions. About the fact that I or we have the pearl of great price. That faith and knowledge go way beyond the circumstances that I'm in this moment. And therefore, these things should not challenge. I should not allow them to challenge my expectation. That Chris shared a word this morning. It reminded me of this verse, John chapter 7. If we believe in him, the scripture says, we will be these rivers of flowing water. Water will flow from us. Life will flow from us. That's an expectation that we can carry all the time. I am a person in every season, in every moment. I flow because of Jesus, living water. What does this look like when you get away from the mountaintop? I have several examples of this. One is about Nebuchadnezzar, and he's a king in Babylon, back during the Old Testament, and he has a dream. and he needs interpretation of this dream. This dream was very vivid and very troubling to him. And so he calls the wise men, the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the diviners, the astrologers, and these were like, his spiritual go-to people. These were his his ones that operate in the unknown. And he calls them together and says, hey, I want you to interpret this dream. And they say, sure, no problem. Tell us the dream. He said, no. You're going to tell me the dream and the interpretation. He said, if I give you the dream, you can make up anything. You agree with one another just to save your own necks. But you can see how important this dream is. This isn't just one of those dreams where you were, going down the street without your pants on and you're like, oh man, that was a little creepy. And you're up the next day and you don't really want anybody to interpret that dream, do you? And so this was a troubling dream. This was a spiritual dream. And so he was troubled with it. He said, no, you're going to have to tell me the dream and the interpretation. Their response, they're panicking now. This is Daniel chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. We're going to pick it up there. Their response, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great, no matter how much power you got, you can't ask for this. They're pleading here. However great and mighty has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. You see, that is still a worldview today. If there's a God, he ain't here. I mean, you may say you know God, but here's the deal. When you show up with him, I will believe you. So he gets really upset with them. He gets mad about this. And so he says, if you don't give me the interpretation, I'm going to have all of you killed. I mean, obviously you're no good to me. I'm going to have all of you killed. So the decree went out to put all the wise men to death, and the men were sent out to look for Daniel and his friends. Now Daniel, it's the Daniel, the lion's den Daniel, same Daniel. Daniel is one of the wise men, and he is overseeing the Jews. See, they're captives. This is actually, they're prisoners. And this is a foreign king that he is serving. And so the men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. And so when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had come out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. I think that's pretty cool that that's in there. He showed some wisdom and some tact. He said, he asked the king's officer, so why did the king issue such a harsh decree? So Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream. I want you to see what he's done. He's taken the responsibility for the impossible on. That's what he's done. You can see there is some level of expectation that he knows the God who can do this. And now he is putting himself right in front of the spear, saying, King, give me a little time. I'll give you your interpretation. He's not running. He's not hiding. He's not saying, hey, we're Jews. We don't know anything about that. He's saying, I'll do it. Give me some time. Don't go killing everybody. Give me some time. It's a foreign king. He serves foreign gods. These are a foreign people. They're all pagans. But Daniel doesn't want any of them to die, because this is how the people of God operate. This is a God moment. This is what it looks like. There's hardship, there's tragedy, there's injustice, there's fear, there's anger, there's rage. What do they need? They need God. That's what we do. Daniel is a God person. So Daniel, after he leaves the king, then he goes back, verse 17, chapter 2. Then Daniel returns to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he urged them, plead for mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery. So you can see, this wasn't all orchestrated and Daniel already had the answer, did he? He didn't have this loaded up like, hey, king, no sweat, I got this covered because God is already speaking to me. No, what he did is he took on the role of the people of God. They are people who engage humanity with God. They are a part of God's engagement in the needs and the affairs of humanity. He knows his role and he steps into it. He urged them, plead for mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Verse 26. Then the king asked Daniel, also called Belshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Here's Daniel's answer. No wise man, enchanter, musician, diviner can explain to the king the mystery he is asked about. No human can do that. No spiritual advisor can do that. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. What is cool about this is Daniel is playing the role of connecting God and man. That's what he's doing. He's doing what the people of God does. And he's stepping in front of the spear. I will do it. And then he goes and asks God for what it takes to do it. So Daniel interprets the dream. It's a long dream. You can read it. It's about the end times and it's about a lot of different things. You can go ahead and read that for yourself, but we skip to the end of the chapter. He successfully tells the king exactly what the dream is, and it's a weird dream, and the interpretation of it. And then he concludes it with this. We're reading it right here at the beginning of this next slide. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. The supernatural has just happened. A miracle has just happened. An encounter with God has just happened. And in that, man has a decision to make. Always. You have a decision. When we encounter God, if he's real, if we have a mountaintop experience, if we have an encounter with God, then we have a decision to make. If it's real, if there's a supernatural God who's engaging me, then it means something more than I felt good in that moment. Verse 46, the king Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel, and he paid him honor, and he ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. And the king said to Daniel, our punchline, surely your God is the God of gods, and your Lord and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries. For you were able to reveal the mystery. Do you see how it made God real to him? Do you see what has happened? Nebuchadnezzar has encountered the real and living God. He has encountered a God that has shown himself to be greater than all of humanity. And in doing so, his next statement after this, I don't have it in here, is if anybody says anything against, I'm getting my story messed up. We'll come back to it. He says some other things there. But he acknowledges, we're going to get to that story in just a moment. I can do it. Jeff, can we play that video? I have a video for you. It's out of an old movie called The Hoosiers with Gene Hackman. It's a basketball movie. It's a really cool movie, I think. But what I like about it is it kind of does the reverse. This is a small town basketball team, really small town, but they're really good at basketball. And they're going to the championship. And obviously the championship is played in a giant stadium. And so we're going to take a look at this. Have you got it? Okay. They're just arriving at the big stadium in the big city. A little more volume.
Your practice schedule is from 10 to 12. The game will be at 7 o'clock. If you need anything, why just let me know. Kind of off the record, I think this is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to Indiana basketball. So we're all behind you. Good luck and tear 'em up. Good luck, guys.
Buddy, hold this into the backboard. What is it?
15 feet.
15 feet. Scott, put Ollie on your shoulders. Measure this from the rim. Buddy? How far?
10 feet.
10 feet. I think you'll find it's exact same measurements as our gym back in Hickory. Okay, let's get dressed for practice.
That's good. This is what God, can we bring that light back up? Number 13. You see, it's the other way for us. We're in the big stadium with the big bands and the thousands of people, and it's easy to lose ourselves in the emotion of that scenario. But when we're on our own, we're at work, we're at school, we're at home, we're fighting with our relative, and God would say, I'm the same God right here. It's the same mountaintop right here. It's exactly the same to me. I am not more powerful in that conference, or at that youth camp, or at that men's meeting, or that worship service, or that home group, or when you're out in the field with the flowers and the trees and the rivers. I am not more powerful in those places than I am right where you are. It's still 10 feet to the basket. And this is what we grow to know. We continue to look at Nebuchadnezzar at a different time. I call it grave circumstances turned into a God encounter. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he sets up this golden image and he commanded everyone to worship the image or die when the music starts. Just something kings do on occasion. They have a really stupid idea and they can put it into play. And there's these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are also part of Daniel's entourage, who are administrators of the Jewish people. And they don't bow down to the image and they don't worship the image when the music starts. And so people went and told the king, hey, they're not bowing down, they're not worshiping the image. You know how those Jews are. So the king gets on to him and he challenges them. All right, so when I play the music again, you're going to bow to him and then everything will be all right. But if you don't, Daniel 3, starting in verse 15, second half. But if you don't worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Here's his line. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Do you see the gauntlet that has just been laid down for the people of God? Your God can't rescue you from my hand. You may have a great God. You may have a powerful God, whoever you worship, whatever. I'm telling you, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill you, and there's nothing your God can do about it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. This is a no-brainer. This is a non-starter, Mr. King. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. Now, most everybody in this room would probably say, yeah, I believe that God is able to deliver me from the fire. But what can come harder is our next slide, which puts that second piece on, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. He's challenging what the king said. No, your hand is not stronger than our God. This is a mountaintop moment, people. This is what it looks like. What is your expectation? What would your expectation be here? Would you be afraid? Would you wonder if your God was going to come through? What would it look like for your God to come through? Do you believe he will come through no matter what? Is your expectation high in this moment? It's a quick decision. The music's going to play. And if you don't bow, you're going into the furnace. But his next slide is even better. But even if he does not, even if God doesn't save them, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So he's saying, our God can save us. Our God will serve us, but it really isn't the point. The point is, that image is not our God, and nothing will change that. And so the reason we're not bowing down is not to save our life, and the reason we're not bowing down is because God will save our life. We're not bowing down because it's not our God. There's that truth that they're anchored in. And their expectation doesn't come from just being saved. The expectation comes from a reality that their God is really their God. He is really more powerful than the king's hand. And all the rest of it doesn't matter. Is your God that powerful? Do you see your God this way? Do you see your God in such a way that when you're in a hard place, that he is greater and more powerful than your hard place? Is that the God you have? Because you see, if you really believe that, it changes all of your expectations. Things become easier. It's when we're afraid that he won't deliver, he won't come through. I'm not sure where he's at. I don't think he likes me very much right now because I don't really pay much attention to him right now. We tie in our performance. We tie in all kinds of things that muddy up the water of the expectation that he is God. He's God. He's more powerful than any force in my life. It's that simple. So they threw him in the fire. But he was so angry, they stoked up the fire to be 7 times hotter. I mean, he's really showing, I am going to prove to you that I have the stronger hand. And so even the guys that threw them into the fire, they got killed by the fire. And then the king and his entourage, verse 25, he said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th one looks like the son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Come out, come here. And they did. It's a God encounter. Who is it a God encounter for? It's really a God encounter for the king. See, the king encountered a God that was greater than the power of his hand. He didn't think it existed. He didn't think it was out there. Babylon was the most powerful kingdom on the planet at that time. That made Nebuchadnezzar the most powerful person on the planet. And he knew that. But he found out there is someone more powerful, and he is the Most High God. Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Verse 28, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angels and rescued his servants. They trusted in him, and he defied the king's command, willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. This is where he said, if anybody says anything about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God, we'll kill them, cut them into pieces, and tear their house down. He's still got that king issue going on. But he knows now that there is a God. And actually, when you read about Nebuchadnezzar, he grew to have encounters with God, personal encounters with God. This is what it looks like to be a mountaintop person everywhere you go. So you see, we have to protect our expectation. It's not about, will God do everything I want him to do for me? Which is the perennial trap for all Christians. Will he do everything I want him to do for me? Or is he engaged in every part of my life and I can experience him there? Every point of my life. Because you see, when I start moving in that, what happens is I begin to mature. When I begin to see mountaintop experiences, we're only meant to build my expectation that he exists and that he's here for me. And that he will use me in these impossible moments. And therefore, when you and I are in that place, we can step in front of the spear for people and say, I will talk to God, and he will give us the answer. Can you see yourself doing that? Can you see yourself at work, at church, at home, at school, when people are desperate, you stepping in and saying, I will talk to God, and he will give us the answer. They're simple words, but they're words that come out of an expectation that God answers us. And God hears us, and he answers us. I want to close with this slide. Genesis 41, verse 15 and 16. This is dream day. Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh heard that Joseph could interpret dreams. He said, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph said, I cannot do it. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. That's you. That's me. When somebody is in need and they say, they have an expectation because of your life, of you, and they come to you and say, I hear you can do this, and you are now in a place not only to represent God, but to then set yourself in the place of listening and speaking for God in a way that brings others into a place of expectation. That's the greatest gift we can give to the world, is an expectation and an encounter with God. I feel like we're often babies in our expectation. It's caught up in, a mixed track record on, he doesn't answer my prayers very often. And I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with my life. How could I possibly tell somebody else what they're supposed to do with their life? And what I would say is this: stop using yourself as the example of your faith life. You see, because when I'm the example of my faith life, I play all kinds of games with me. But if you will step outside of you and you will look for places, you will have an expectation that God can and will act. And his desire is to reveal himself, and his desire is that we would have an expectancy of that. And when we step into that, God will meet you there. He will meet you there. If you would stand.